Baker Show.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and a huge warm welcome back to the Kev Baker Show. With me, your host, Kev Baker, and I'm coming to you live from Glasgow, Scotland. And of course, we're all here together via Truth Frequency Radio, www.tfrlive.com. And tonight is going to be a real highlight moment for me. You know, we're approaching 1,000 episodes on the show, and tonight is 992. And, you know, this is almost a bit self-indulgent, a gift to myself and to you, the listeners, because we all know how much of a little science geek I am, and we all laugh and joke at the nickname that we've kind of jokingly given me, which is, of course, Quantum Kev. So tonight, I'm actually pretty nervous, but I'm extremely excited. And I can safely say it's not very often you get to speak to someone that has attempted to view the immediate moments right after the Big Bang. But that's exactly what tonight's guest is attempting to do. And his name is Dr. Brian Keating, and he's a professor of physics at the Center of Astrophysics and Space Sciences in the Department of Physics at University of California, San Diego. A big shout out to everyone there. He's a big public speaker, he's an inventor and an expert in the study of the universe's oldest light, the cosmic microwave background, also known as the CMB. And you've heard myself and Anthony Patch and others talking about this before. And he uses it to learn the origin and evolution of the universe. Dr. Keating is a pioneer in the search for the earliest physical evidence in the inflationary epoch. Now, that's the theorized period of expansion of space in the early universe directly and immediately after the Big Bang. Now, Dr. Keating is also the author of the book titled Losing the Nobel Prize. And that's the inside story of a quest to unlock one of cosmology's biggest mysteries, derailed by the lure of the Nobel Prize. What would it have been like to eyewitness or be an eyewitness to the Big Bang? The book has been described as one of the greatest stories told in cosmology, and he is here live with us on the Kev Baker Show tonight to get into all of this with us. I urge you all to check out his website, and that's www.briankeating.com. That's KEATING.com. And you can also find the book, Losing the Nobel Prize, over at Amazon. So, Brian, it is an absolute honour to have you on the show tonight, sir. A big, huge, warm welcome to KBS.
No, thank you so much. It's a real pleasure and treat for me to be with you and your listeners.
Well, you know, it's almost like a synchronicity because from time to time on the show, well, quite a lot on the show, I speak about space and science and stuff like that. And when I was getting into some of your research today, there was something niggling at the back of my mind, and it was to do with something that you're a very big part of called the BICEP. Now, I remember all of the science websites and the publications that I like to kind of pore over for my own kind of enjoyment and for material for the show. This experiment back in 2014, I believe it was really causing shockwaves, not just in the science world, but in major publications as well. And here we are tonight, after me talking about this experiment all those years ago, speaking to the man that was instrumental in it. So this is really cool, Brian. Thanks so much for coming on.
Yeah, I love talking about science, and it's a treat for me to talk to people that are as curious as you and your listeners are.
So we're here tonight, and we're going to get into the Nobel Prize. But what was it that led you, obviously, this experiment that kind of catapulted you up to the kind of forefront of your field? And this BICEP experiment. Talk to us about what that was all about, Brian.
Yeah, well, you know, I was always fascinated with trying to investigate, you know, the deepest questions in life, the meaning of life, the meaning of why are we here? What is the great future lie in store for me personally, for the universe as a whole? And I think, you know, from an early age, I had a fascination with the heavens, with the sky. And I always thought that beautiful in its appearance, and I never really realized. You've probably heard of cosmetologists, and people often mistake me for that. Because of my beautiful coiffed hair. Just kidding, I don't really have great hair, but anyway, the prefix cosm that lies at the heart of cosmology and cosmetology is from the same root word that means beautiful and beautiful appearance. And I think it's, for me, when I look at the heavens, it is almost as if I'm looking at a painting by, Monet or Picasso or Vincent van Gogh. Looking at the heavens evokes something visceral and primitive in most people. And to be able to study it as my profession, my vocation, as well as my avocation, is just the greatest treat. So for me, I always wanted to go back and in time, and that was always something I always thought about, whether it be go back in time to see the dinosaurs walking around, or go back in time and talk with Jesus or something like that. The ability to look back in time is afforded to astronomers by courtesy of our telescopes. So it's just a delight to be able to do that for my profession.
No, absolutely. And like I was saying there, you were literally attempting to capture the light that was released, produced, and sent out the moments after the Big Bang. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah. That was, the light itself was produced about 400,000 years after the Big Bang, this cosmic microwave background radiation. But the signal that we wanted to see was actually hidden and obscured by the very light source we were using to detect the presence of the Big Bang. And what we were trying to do is see farther back in time, as you said, to really the first trillionths of a second after the Big Bang. And that was the goal of the BICEP experiment, to look back to this primeval epoch, which almost every cosmologist working in the profession believed took place, and that is called inflation. When the universe expanded at an accelerating, mind-bending pace that could, in some cases, exceed the speed of light. And to think about what that would mean, to witness that, would really be tantamount to capturing the earliest baby pictures that could ever be taken in the universe.
It's super cool. And, we've spoke about the Big Bang on the show here many times, and we've even offered up, alternatives to that. And we spoke about expansion on here before, because like you say, we've never really seen that moment where it all really sparked off from. And we talk about tetrahedrons, the work of Buckminster Fuller, and how possibly we could be looking at an expansion process from that singularity.
Yeah, well, so the great cosmologist and physicist Sir Roger Penrose has conjectured, and recently conjectured, as a matter of fact, that lurking within the BICEP2 data were signatures of a pre-existing epoch prior to our own universe's existence, that there was what he calls an eon that predates our universe, and that evidence for it in what he called the form of Hawking points, primordial black hole signatures in the microwave background pattern that we detected, were indicative of this. And that was really kind of a shot across the bow to many of us working in the field, to hear, this esteemed cosmologist speak about an alternative, and almost in hushed tones. It's almost something you don't dare speak about until you've reached a certain level of sobriety in your career, that you could actually challenge the orthodoxy of the standard cosmological model. Now, whether or not he's correct, is a subject that will be carried out in a scientific journal by qualified peer reviewers. But nevertheless, the existence of an alternative really breaks the monopoly that inflation is said to have held on cosmology for about 45 years now. So I think it's a healthy development. I think it's an intriguing development that there are alternatives to the paradigm, because I think it gets boring when you just can, only add on decimal places to your knowledge, and it's so much more exciting when there's new frontiers to conquer intellectually and otherwise.
Absolutely. You're speaking my language, Brian, and it almost becomes, dare I say it, religious, faith-based, when you just stick to the theoretical stuff that some hasn't been proved in the lab. And we were encouraged as well when we seen a story about an alternative to a black hole at the center of the Milky Way. So I definitely see what you're seeing as well, new ideas coming out, new hypotheses. And that's got to be exciting, because that's where advancements and learning comes from. Now,
Absolutely. And it's funny you mentioned the kind of religious orthodoxy that surrounds some scientific sentiments. And I did a short video for an outlet in America called Prager University, and it's called "Which is a Bigger Leap of Faith, God or the Multiverse?" Now, I should expand on what the multiverse means. It's a consequence of the theory of inflation that posits that somewhere in the multiverse, there's a universe in which you're on the Brian Keating show, and I'm talking with my good guest, astrophysicist Kev Baker. Okay, so this universe model within the multiverse suggests there's an infinity, potentially, of other universes out there in the so-called multiverse. And I can explain later, if you're interested, what is the impetus for such a model. But this video was not meant in any way, I don't advocate for any religious doctrine whatsoever, but some of the most, I received over 3 million views in the last 4 months or so. And this video received the most vitriolic comments were coming from other scientists. And it was just so interesting to me. And I don't, as I said, it's 4 minutes long. I don't advocate for God. I'm just pointing out the fact that there are unseen forces that lurk within the souls of scientists that cause them to believe things that cannot be proven or to advance or advocate for in the case where things cannot be established experimentally. And that to me is reminiscent of religion, which should be what science is not. We shouldn't have to accept things based on faith. And yet there's a lot of controversial statements in my field that if you don't accept the standard paradigm that inflation took place, you're marginalized and are not part of the mainstream scientific culture. I think that's dangerous for the progress of science.
Oh, would I sign up for a course at your university, Brian? Honestly, before I take you too much on a tangent, let's get back to BICEP. And, this is an absolutely amazing piece of equipment. Talk to us about, where it was set up. That's of interest to me as well. And what eventually went wrong with that?
I think the basic issue at heart was that we were seeking to detect a signal, and we were so deeply committed to the detection of that signal, in part, at least on my end, I can't speak for my colleagues, but on my end, I knew that if we were successful, we would win a Nobel Prize. And that was something that animated me. I'm sort of ashamed to admit in the book as a memoir. The book is a memoir of what it's like to be a real scientist, not to be disrespectful to the late, great Stephen Hawking, but his books were very little autobiographical. It was mostly his essays on time and on black holes and fascinating scientific details. But you saw with the success of his movie, the movie about him, that people really care most about his personal life and what it's like to be him rather than what it's like to read his papers. There's very few people on earth that are said to have completed reading his book, for example. So from my perspective, I wanted to make it personal. I wanted to describe what does it feel like to be on the cusp of making the discovery of a lifetime, to be whispered about in the halls of Nobel Prize stardom, to be positioned in a place that you might have glimpsed along with your hardworking team, the very earliest elements of the universe's origin. And then, unfortunately, this telescope, which I called BICEP, which stands for Background Imaging of Cosmic Extragalactic Polarization, and it was a hat tip to the muscle bicep that lifts weights in a curling motion. The pattern that we were looking for were curls and swirls in this microwave background's polarization. And so it's a play on words. I'm an unrepentant punster. And this experiment was located at the very bottom of the world in Antarctica at the South Pole, the axis on which the Earth is spinning upon. So this experiment observed for 3 years and took us back, farther in time, we thought, than human beings had ever been allowed to see before. Unfortunately, the discovery that we put forth and claimed to have made, namely that we saw what we set out to see, we had to eventually retract that portion of the discovery. We didn't make a blunder. I always say we didn't leave the lens cap on the telescope, as I often do when I take pictures of my kids. But instead, we had an interpretation for the data that no longer could stand up to the scientific criticism that almost immediately followed thereafter our announcement.
Now, this put you, obviously, when you first came out and announced this, like I say, even people like myself, we were compelled to talk about it on shows like this because this was very, very big news. And that did put you in line for the Nobel. And this is where you got into the world of the Nobel Prize, isn't it?
Yeah, this is exactly right. So this experiment, if correct, would have meant that we had seen the universe's birth pangs. So this was talked about as by many people as assuredly worthy of a Nobel Prize. After being confirmed that it would assuredly win a Nobel Prize, and there were actual websites, in various locations that were, taking, bookmakers basically making odds on who would win the Nobel Prize. And it turned out amongst several people, I was in the top running, the top handful, 5 or so people to win a Nobel Prize, according to this informal survey online. And it really tickled me. The downside for me is that I wasn't anymore in the leadership role of the experiment that I had created, and I had essentially gotten marginalized to being a spectator, more or less, on the outskirts of this experiment. And that was sort of the genesis of the title of the book. The title of the book has essentially 3 different meanings, if you will. One is what is it like to compete in the scientific arena at the highest levels and aspire to win the Nobel Prize and come up short. And another meaning of the book's title was only discovered, and maybe we'll get into that in the second half of the show today, but what I encountered when I was asked to nominate the winners of the 2016 Nobel Prizes. And so to see it on both sides, to see it on the side of a scientist aspiring, perhaps too lustfully looking to win the Nobel Prize for himself and his ego, as I discuss in the book, and then to be on the other side of it, having lost it, and then grappling with what effects is it having on society and scientists in general. That was really a startling revelation for me.
And you mentioned your ego there and the Nobel Prize, and who can blame you at all, Brian? When I was growing up, the Nobel Prize, if that was the thing, and if you're a physicist, then it is the very thing. The Stones, like, been asked to come back the next year, to come back and nominate the people next year. I nearly fell off the chair when I heard you saying that today.
Yeah, that was just as startling to me. I mean, it came right after the announcements of the Nobel Prizes, the year, potentially in an alternate universe in the multiverse that I could have won it. That was surreal, truly surreal to be asked by the Swedish Royal Academy of Sciences to nominate the winners of the next year's Nobel Prizes.
Now, talk to us a little bit about then the history of the Nobel Prize, because I was quite interested when you were describing how it actually came about with the Nobel brothers, I believe it was.
Yeah. So the Nobel family, starting with the father, Emmanuel Nobel, they were called the Russian Rockefellers. They were really arms manufacturers that were selling different types of ordnance to the Russians back then in the middle 1800s. And one thing that they really desperately wanted to do is find a type of explosive that could be transported safely. So back then, when they were wanting to explode something, they would use nitroglycerin and other chemicals that are very volatile. And what was the holy grail back then, the killer app, literally to kill people and also to blow stuff up, would be for construction, would be something that could be stabilized and transportable. In particular, this is around the time the U.S. was expanding westward after the Civil War. And Alfred Nobel's younger brother, Emil Nobel, one day in the 1860s was experimenting with nitroglycerin, and the experiment ended rather badly, even worse than some of my undergraduates perform in the lab. And in fact, it killed him and several other people, sadly, when he dropped a vial of liquid nitroglycerin on the floor of the laboratory of the family in outside of Stockholm. When that happened, it really sent the elder Nobel, Emmanuel, into an incredible, obviously, depression, sadness. He'd already lost several children to different diseases and illnesses earlier on. And so only only 3 of his sons out of 7 total kids, I believe, survived past the age of 22. And so what I think this did is really inspire Alfred Nobel to construct and to really correct the mistakes that his brother had made and make a stable version of nitroglycerin. And he did so in the form of dynamite. And that was one of his 355 patents, and by far the most profitable. It made him one of the wealthiest people in the world. And so it was really the death of his younger brother, in my opinion, that inspired him and really, motivated him to find this safer version. In fact, he originally wanted to call dynamite Alfred Nobel's safety powder, if you can imagine that. So this then was used for many purposes throughout Europe and elsewhere to make projects for construction. And eventually, he became so rich and famous, and his past kind of came to light, that in 1888 he read an obituary that claimed that he had died. Which obviously he hadn't. That report was exaggerated, but it said that Alfred Nobel was the merchant of death, and he had caused more people to die more quickly and efficiently than any other person in history. And that really set him on a course of rectification and redemption of the Nobel name.
Yeah, that would certainly be a kind of kick in the teeth if you're reading your own obituary and you get described that way. And, you went on, and we can get into this more on the other side of the break, but you really gave me an eye-opening experience about how this Nobel Prize really works. And even when they first set it up, I mean, it was originally just set up for something that had been discovered in that previous year, something that was very kind of life-changing, something that would make a real change in the world. And you brought up during one of your talks, I think it was at Google, how a lighthouse was actually the winner one time, wasn't it?
Yeah, in 1912, a Swedish gentleman named Gustav Dalén invented an automatic regulator for the purpose of illuminating lighthouses and buoys. And, so now that award, I don't know for sure if he actually invented that in 1910. For technical reasons, they didn't give it to him for 2 years afterwards. But anyway, I don't know if he invented it the year before as Alfred Nobel's will. So part of my mission when I was asked to nominate the winners of the 2016 Nobel Prizes was to go back and look at Alfred Nobel's will. And I figured, well, why not give the guy his due and look, what did he want when he wrote down his will? What did he want? And how can I live up to this lofty criteria that he laid out? And it turned out that almost none of the stipulations that he made in his will were being adhered to by the Nobel Committee and the Swedish Royal Academy, and that included that the discovery must be made the year before the Nobel Prize was awarded. That actually never took place in history. Last year we came fairly close to it. It was only about 2 years after the discovery was the Nobel Prize awarded, but be that as it may, that's sort of a qualm. But many Nobel Prizes, in fact, most of them, the gap between the year a person discovered a scientific discovery and he or she, but mostly he, because only 2 women have ever won it, are awarded the Nobel Prize, is approaching 30 to 40 years now. So it's gone from 1 year, which is what Alfred Nobel wanted in his will, to 30 times that. It's an incredible violation of what he wanted. And so you have to ask yourself, well, why are they doing that? Why are they not adhering to his will? I mean, after all, if you write something in your will, by definition, you're not going to be able to, ensure that it takes place after you die.
Yeah, it's like the very rules of the game that he set up. You're not even adhering to the main rule of it. And I think the experiment that you were referring to that almost made it within the time window would have been the LIGO. And that was the one that detected the gravitational waves. And before we go to the break, I mean, obviously I'm asking you to speculate here, Brian, but do you think that really was gravitational waves they detected? Because when I looked at that kind of the machine they've got there and the equipment, I mean, it's pretty safe to say that a butterfly flapping its wings in Nicaragua could probably set that thing off, right?
Yeah. Well, it turns out they have an awful lot of safeguards to prevent that. It's funny because they had 2 detectors. One was in Washington State in America, and the other one was in Louisiana. And if you've ever been to the States in Louisiana, I have some friends from there. They're good old boys. They like to go out with their shotguns and go hunting and so forth. And these tunnels, these multi-kilometer long tunnels that LIGO needs, they would use that for target practice. They would not a butterfly flapping its wings, but my friend Billy Bob, shooting it with a shotgun from 20 meters away instead, and that didn't trigger a detection signature, as did the inspiraling of these black holes. So I think it's safe to say, but I want to, on the other side, perhaps talk to you about something maybe nearer and dearer to your heart, which is the fact that Nobel Prize, unjustly, in my opinion, did a tremendous disservice to one of your countrymen, a gentleman by the name of Ron Drever, a Scotsman. And hopefully we'll have time to get into that in the next segment.
Absolutely. And I urge people out there, we're right on the break, but go and visit the website for briankeating.com and check out the book, Losing the Nobel Prize. You can get it over on Amazon. You can find out all about it on his website. And we'll be back on the other side. What a show it's been so far. We've still got another half an hour with Dr. Brian Keating to go. I hope everyone's enjoying this half as much as I am. We will be right back.
This is the Kev Baker Show.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. You're tuned into the Kev Baker Show with our very special guest tonight, coming all the way from the University of California, San Diego, and that is astrophysicist Dr. Brian Keating. And he's also the author of the book, Losing the Nobel Prize. Now, before the break, Brian, you were kind of telling me how one of my fellow Scotsmen got diddled out of the credit for a Nobel Prize. Go figure. What happened there, man?
Yeah, so this is a sad story. So back as we were talking about the LIGO experiment, which won the Nobel Prize in 2017, the actual discovery event was taking place, actually was detected at these two observatories located thousands of kilometers apart, one in Washington State, one in Louisiana. And it detected a signal that was later confirmed to be from the collision of two black holes. And the two black holes were colliding in a galaxy that wasn't quite certain to, we weren't certain of its location, but we were certain that its distance was approximately 1 billion light years from Earth. Now, this signal was detected on September 15th, 2015. And it brought it September 14th, 2015, and it immediately set off alarm bells in the scientific community, and people were getting really excited about it. And even the whispers of the immediate Nobel Prize started to come out after a physicist by the name of Lawrence Krauss tweeted about this result that he had heard about, this rumor, and immediately there were predictions of an imminent Nobel Prize for the LIGO experiment. Now, I only later learned that when I was asked to nominate the winners of the Nobel Prize, that I had to submit my nomination no later than January 30th, 2016, in order for my nomination to be considered for the 2016 Nobel Prize in Physics. So I had heard these rumors, and I was waiting for confirmation by the LIGO team that they were correct. So months went by because I would surely have selected them to win the Nobel Prize. The discovery was just phenomenal. And one of the three that I would have selected was a physicist by the name of Ron Drever, who had been at Edinburgh for many years and had come to California Institute of Technology, where I worked for a while in the early part of the 2000s. And anyway, this gentleman, along with two other scientists, Ray Weiss and Kip Thorne, had proposed building LIGO and had supported LIGO over 40 years. So it took 40 years to build and get the experiment working and funded and so forth. The signal was detected on September 14th, 2015.
Now, Brian, I think maybe, can you move your microphone just a little bit?
Yeah, is it a little too loud or?
That's it. Fine. I think it was catching your breath as well, sir.
Oh,
sorry
yeah.
about that. There we go.
Yeah. I've got a filter now in front of it. So the signal was detected on September 14, 2015. The signals have been traveling at the speed of light for over 1 billion years. They entered the telescope, but the LIGO team did not make the announcement until February 11th, 2016. So I actually had to submit my nomination for the Nobel Prize that year by January 30th. So had they announced the decision 11 days earlier, I would have nominated them for the Nobel Prize that year. But no mind, I figured, well, they'll just have to wait till next year, and then someone else, if not me, will nominate them to win the Nobel Prize for 2017. Unfortunately, before that happened, the physicist Ron Drever died in March of 2017. And by these really cruel, in my opinion, rules of the Nobel Committee that were adopted in 1974, posthumous Nobel Prizes cannot be awarded for any reason. So in other words, technically, if you die, an hour before the ceremony, they don't have to give it to you. Now, such things have almost happened, but certainly in the case of Ron Drever, who died in March, the ceremony is in December, there was no way that they were going to give it to him. Now, they ended up giving it to a third person by the name of Barry Barish, who's another wonderful scientist and was very instrumental, literally, in the LIGO construction. However, because they only allow 3 people to win the Nobel Prize, had the signals arrived 11 days earlier into the LIGO detector and everything else in cosmic history taken place at the same pace, and there's no reason to expect it would have been different, then Ron Drever would have won the Nobel Prize the year, months before he died, and his family could have, shared in the triumph of 4 decades of scientific achievement. Instead, he was written out of the discovery because they don't award Nobel Prizes posthumously. And I ask you if that's a fair thing, and I don't think it is, and I don't think it represents how science is actually done. I think in some ways, as I said, it's cruel, especially to the children and the family of Ron Drever and other notable laureates who should have had their due, but died before their prize was actually given to them or given to their discovery.
Signal that had been traveling for 1 billion years and then to lose out for the space of 11 days. I mean, it's pretty ridiculous. It really, really is. Now, tell me, what is it for a physicist to win a Nobel Prize? What happens then, Brian? Are you automatically escalated to the top of the pyramid? What happens realistically?
Yeah. It's the highest accolade in science. I claim it's the highest accolade in all of humanity. There's really no second to it. And especially in science where, they've only given out a couple of hundred of these in the history of humanity. And the people who have won it are the most famous scientists that ever existed. And I actually say in the book, I don't have a problem with any of the people that won it, more or less. There are a couple I would not have given it to. But the problem is who they haven't given it to. So I just mentioned Ron Drever. There are many other examples. Many times it's women who are cut out, denied of their rightful share, and they end up losing it to their male collaborators. And I think that cannot really stand anymore in this era of Me Too and the empowerment movement for women, which I think is overdue.
Yeah, that's something I was going to bring up because I talk about artificial intelligence a lot, probably too much. And one thing we see in AI is the biases that come out. No matter how well they try to program them, they always seem to have biases from the data, the material that they learn from. And talk about biases when it comes to the Nobel Prize. And all humans, we all have biases, but never have I been so it's so obvious when you look at the awards over the years. And I was kind of startled. It was shocking when I heard that only 2 women have ever won this. And thanks, I found out that it was only at a push. You had Marie Curie, and it was only because of her husband that actually insisted on it. And then another lady who came from your university, right?
That's right. Yeah, Maria Gephardt-Mayer. She was toiling here, and she actually had to be nominated 27 times before she won the Nobel Prize she deserved. And you wonder, even back then, and when she won, her son told me that the newspaper here in San Diego said that announced her winning, and they said a San Diego housewife has won the Nobel Prize. So you think about how times have changed, but the Nobel Prize really hasn't. That was 54 years ago since the last woman won a Nobel Prize in physics. And I point out in the book, that's fewer than 1% of all winners are women, despite the fact that, science is a male-dominated field and women are increasingly becoming better represented. But even in a university setting where we have 20% women in the physics faculty, or maybe a quarter or even a third, we're trying to always grow that number. It's still too low for us, but at least it's 30 times higher than the number of Nobel Prize winning percentage-wise women have won. I think it's really a shame, and it gets worse every year because women are getting older, just like men are getting older, and some of them, and most notably recently, Vera Rubin, who is credited with discovering dark matter, she died on Christmas Day 2016, and according to their rather cruel rules, that she'll never be eligible to win the Nobel Prize. I think that's really a disservice to women and girls. I have 2 young daughters now, and in their room they have a poster of Maria Gephardt-Mayer, for inspiration. And I want my children to look up to. But you said, what is it like to win a Nobel? One of my friends won the Nobel Prize, Roger Tsien, back in 2008, I think. And he said it was the last moment of peace I ever had. You basically get inundated with requests for speaking appearances, for, to be on fundraisers, to be speaking for, to be on a corporation's board, to move to another university, which will pay you better. And really you go on off the track of research that got you to the Nobel Prize in the first place. Of course, by the time you win it, the average age last year was about 81 years old for the three people that won the Nobel Prize. So, you're well into your golden years when you get the Nobel Gold Medallion to hang around your neck.
And, you're really refreshing, because the way you speak about science and your experiments, you love to string a bit of humor in there as well. And I really appreciate that. And when you were showing the slide about the average age, you had the Grim Reaper up the top. I tell you, if it does, you're right, because I think it was about 70, 80 years old your graph went up to. And I mean, I know they're trying to prolong life and longevity and stuff like that, but come on.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's just gotten to the point now. They just today I was engaged with by the Secretary General of the Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences, who took interest in my book, shall we say, in my writing online, and he's criticized my criticism of the Nobel Prize. But one of the things he says is that we want to be so thorough in vetting it because we want to live up to what Alfred Nobel wanted, and it's true they're taking their time to vet things, but that's not what Alfred Nobel wanted. He wanted it given every year, and I think the prize would look very different if they followed that rule. And most people say, "Oh, the Nobel Prize is fine," and what do you want to change it for? And again, it's not with the people that have won it. It's with the people that don't win it and what that does to the perception of science and scientists. And I think that's the thing that is harmful, and that I want to actually save the Nobel Prize. I've come here not to crucify it, but to save it. And in that sense, I hope that they'll take my suggestions for reform to heart, but I'm not entirely optimistic, especially given his email or his commentary on this piece I wrote for the website called The Conversation US, where I really lay out a couple of the grievances that I have with the Nobel Prize and what could be done about it. But there's very little, light at the end of the tunnel that says that they are likely to take these intentions to heart, which is sad, because I think until somebody boycotts it, when somebody boycotts the Nobel Prize, then they'll have a crisis to deal with. It's much better to deal with things when they're, slow and easy pace to deal with, and do things deliberately rather than in crisis mode. As the Nobel Prize in Literature is now suffering, it's been canceled this year. There is no Nobel Prize winner in literature for 2018 because of a sex scandal and a financial crimes investigation going on within the hallowed halls of the Swedish Academy.
So if you could change one thing overnight, Brian, what would you do to eradicate what we've seen with the Nobel Prize?
I would definitely change the way that it's the number of people that it could be awarded to. That's one of the top two things I think you could do. And the thing that's so frustrating to me as a conscientious person about the prize, and again, not wanting to kill it, but wanting to reform it, is that these would cost them nothing, literally nothing to do, to enact, where you would give the Nobel Prize in Physics to a group of people. So everybody who invented LIGO, including Drever, or everybody who played a role in the discovery of the Higgs boson in 2012. Again, another Scotsman, comes into play there. And then, but there's the Peace Prize already does that. So they don't even have to rewrite some of the rules that the Nobel, Foundation employs, in that they can already give it to groups of people in the Nobel Prize for Peace, which in some ways the prize that was closest to Alfred's heart. He was a real pacifist, despite his profiteering from wars. He was a soul that wanted to end warfare and bring peace between nations. And I think to bring peace between physicists, it would be to more accurately represent how science is done. It's not just me, some lone white American guy working by myself that suddenly has a genius insight. That was true in the 1800s when Alfred wrote his will down and the first few Nobel laureates were awarded. But it hasn't been true in at least 60 years, since the beginning of World War II.
Now, Brian, I urge everyone to check out the book Losing the Nobel Prize, but talk to us, if you may, or if you will, about what you're working on now, because I was reading today about something called the Simons Array down in Chile. So what's this all about, man?
Yeah, so there is a new project that we've been initiating with funding from the Simons Foundation, a nonprofit foundation that supports basic research. So this is research that has no expectation for profit margins or to create a better iPhone or something like that, but instead to actually create a better and deeper understanding of how science operates at the most fundamental levels. And it includes astronomy and cosmology, my subject. So with help of 255 of the most brilliant people on Earth, I have been able to help start a collaboration to build an array of massive telescopes, not at the bottom of the world in Antarctica, but at the top of the world in Chile, in the Andes Mountains of northern Chile, in a place called the Atacama Desert, an otherworldly Martian-like landscape about 5,200 meters above sea level, where you'll suffer tremendously if you don't wear oxygen like an astronaut working up there. And we're building telescopes that range in size from several meters tall to one that's going to be in a building that's 15 meters tall, that has a diameter of its mirror that's 6 meters in diameter, just astronomical proportions for these telescopes. And there's going to be not one of them, but there's going to be 4 of them operating simultaneously to really go deeper into the signal that was first interpreted as potential evidence for the inflationary expansion of the universe. And this time we hope, building on what we discovered from BICEP, that we can see not only the material that's in our galaxy, but we can go beyond our galaxy to the very beginning of time. And I think the lesson of BICEP stands so strongly that, again, we didn't make a mistake. We didn't leave the kick out the cable from the mains. We made an exquisite measurement that we have tremendous confidence in till this day, but what we interpreted it to be was incorrect. And that's what the Simons Observatory is going to rectify. It's going to not rectify, it's going to be done in parallel with another version of BICEP, the 4th generation of BICEP now. It's called BICEP Array. And these 2 experiments were friendly, competitors now. And we want to discover whether or not we can get a pristine image of the microphysics that took place in the very early universe.
Now, Brian, when you said you kind of interpreted the data wrong, would it be fair to say then, and this is no criticism because we all do this, was that a case of confirmation bias, actually looking at it so that it fit what you theorized it would be?
Yeah, there's always this temptation in order to really, go back as far back as you could potentially go, to look at a signal and see what you want to see in it. And we were far from, I'm really saying myself here, I was far from the first scientist to have confirmation bias where I wanted to see something so badly, in my case, to win a Nobel Prize perhaps, and to make a discovery of such magnitude that it would really reverberate through the scientific history. And so when that happens, sometimes you're willing to overlook that nagging suspicion that maybe you got something wrong. And as Richard Feynman, Nobel laureate for his theory on quantum electrodynamics in the 60s said, science itself is a tool for not fooling yourself. And you have to always be aware that you're the easiest person to fool, because you want to believe something so badly that sometimes you'll accept data too easily, and sometimes you'll reject other data that could refute your hypothesis too straightforwardly. And I think now, with the knowledge that I have now and that the community has as a whole, and I think that it's much more on guard against these effects that are so pernicious, confirmation bias being one of the most pronounced ones.
Now, there must be a heck of a lot of data produced from these telescopes that you work with. And we've seen CERN recently. They started employing the quantum computers, the D-Wave. And there was a story out recently how AI had detected 72 previously undetected fast radio bursts. Do you have any plans to kind of up the game and look at the data that way? Because we know that it finds patterns that, again, no offense to you, but no humans can see in amongst the data.
Yeah. There are ways that we are devising to essentially blind ourselves to the effects that could otherwise cause confirmation bias. So, for example, by splitting up our data in a way and analyzing it dispassionately by a supercomputer, you can you can make combinations of the data that should essentially show no signal. So let's say I say, make a map of the moon on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, and then make a map of the moon on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays. Those two sets of images should be the same. So now if you subtract those two sets of images from one another, you should have no signal. And to the extent that you do have a signal that persists, that tells you something either about your instrument is not operating the way you think it is, or perhaps there's something lurking in the data that you need to be more cognizant of. So building in techniques like that, I'm oversimplifying it drastically, but building in safeguards where computers stand in for hearts and minds of squishy hominids like ourselves who have all sorts of all too human frailties and dispositions. I think that is a good thing, and it's a new development that is really being enabled by these massive developments in computing power and by analysts and theorists that are working in my field.
Absolutely. And, before I let you go, we've got about 5 moments left, or 5 minutes, sorry. See, I'm too excited tonight, but we'll hear Elon Musk and people, they often sound the alarm over the artificial intelligence. And I know it's not specifically your field, Brian, but what's your thoughts on that? Because this is a big change that's coming in the world, and it's already here. So what do you think about artificial intelligence? I can see the positive side, the medical advantages, stuff like that, finding out things we've never learned before. But I also see, the Terminator kind of scenario as well. But so what's your thoughts on it, man?
Yeah, it's a really fascinating question that we could devote another hour to someday. My basic feeling is that it's a technology that has become, in some circles demonized because it is so simple to make the Terminator and the other analogies. But, in the room, I can't say her name out loud or she'll start talking back to me and making noise. But I have a digital assistant that has a name and I can invoke. Yeah, and I can do things with her that is just tremendously multiplying. Somebody told me, I think it was Professor Adam Frank said something like the equivalent in every household in the Western world, we have the equivalent of 50 butlers, working for us, doing stuff for us, compared to the way life was just 100 or 200 years ago. And those are outlets and computers and all sorts of machines that just save us tremendous labor. And I look forward to a future where we can augment human intelligence, and that, because I'm a scientist and I want to know the answers to as many questions I can on the limited amount of time on this giant ball of dust called the Earth that I am blessed to be able to inhabit. And if I can know more and more answers to those questions within reason, with ethical boundaries imposed upon things, you shouldn't just do it without any ethical implications considered. But I'm excited about it. I think it's going to be a fantastic development that's going to be akin to the advent of computing itself and the internet. And I think that those will just have awesome breakthrough potential for humanity. And somebody once said, well, they should give a Nobel Prize. Maybe they'll give a Nobel Prize someday to a computer. And who knows? Maybe they will.
That was actually going to be my next question, because, they say, and it's true, I mean, AI, will come up with new inventions, new ideas. It will literally unlock the secrets of the universe. And as a cosmologist and astrophysicist, like I was saying, the data that you have to pore over just to get the most simple answers at times, Brian, this is going to unlock answers that maybe you haven't even asked the questions to yet.
Exactly. Although you did point out a very important thing that I always like to point out to people, which is that, the AI is only as good as the human beings, the non-AI, just the intelligence, the natural intelligence that trains them. So you have things where you'll have, you'll have an AI system that'll be racist, or it'll have prejudices built into it based on, certain peccadillos of the programmers of it. And when people point and they say, well, this sorted through a catalog of galaxies that would take a human being 1,000,000 years, or 100 years to sort through. And I say, well, but did you count the 25 years of the postdoc's life spent to getting his PhD or her PhD? No, you didn't. Like, to train it, I think it can be wildly sensationalized, as well as it can be wildly underestimated, the power that artificial intelligence may bring to humanity. My friend Max Tegmark at MIT calls it Life 3.0, really another version of life, which he contends might be the most populous in the galaxy.
Well, I have been absolutely amazed by this tonight, Brian. I thought tonight would be good, but you have taken it to another level, sir. I could probably geek out with you for about another 10 hours and, it passed in the blink of an eye, but I appreciate the fact you have got to get back to your day. Now, where can people find your work and where can they get a hold of your book, sir?
Yeah, so my book is available online at all sorts of retailers around the world. Its audiobook is coming out this Sunday, so just a few days from now, the audiobook will be out. I'm excited to hear that. I haven't heard it yet, so I wasn't able to read it because I have too many commitments here in San Diego to go off and read it. But I've heard snippets of the narrator. It's fantastic. And then BrianKeating.com. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Twitter at Dr. Brian Keating, BrianKeating.
You've got
on
a cool
Twitter
thing, man. Yeah, I was checking your Facebook and your Twitter today. Very cool. Something I'll definitely be keeping up with. And feel free, Brian, to throw any of your professor friends my way, especially if they're into quantum physics or stuff like that. I'll be most appreciative of that, sir.
I will. I'm going to send you a very good colleague of mine who works on what is known as the reality problem in quantum mechanics. So this is really it's going to fascinate you. He's a brilliant scientist, and I will send him I'll send you his information as we speak.
Well, I can't thank you enough for tonight and what you're doing for science as well. Really, really blown away by this, Brian, and I wish you all the best of luck in the future. And if you can't win the Nobel Prize, then I surely hope you achieve your dreams of reforming it, because it certainly sounds like it needs a good overhaul.
I do too. I thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you, and we'll have Brian back in the future, hopefully, folks. What a guest that was. I'll be back on the other side, so don't go anywhere. You're listening to The Kev Baker Show. I'll be right back.